Welcome back to Real-ationship Goals, a podcast all about exploring the realities and complexities of healthy relationships. Real-ationship Goals is a project of the Prevention and Education team at the Advocacy Center for Crime Victims and Children in Waco, Texas. If you or someone you know has experienced sexual violence or harassment and is seeking support services or needs more information, links to resources and our hotline number can be found in the description. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of their organizations or affiliates. Hey everybody, welcome back to Real-ationship Goals. It's so good to be back with you. I'm Kyla.
I'm Maria.
I'm Alexandra.
Awesome. And we're going to be spending some time today with our friend Alex talking about advocacy and what it means to us, what it can look like. So I guess just jumping right on in. Do we have any preliminary thoughts on the wide world of advocacy and all that it entails?
Oh, it's so big. I mean, it's such a good topic because it's like micro and personal and daily interactions all the way up to a lot of what I get to do, which is state or thinking about federal, or even we can think about internationally. Like advocacy is every part of our interactions with other people in so many moments.
I agree. That's my contribution. No, yeah, I mean, definitely, especially when I started my position here, like learning about advocacy, and like there's so many different parts that go into it, and like, are you advocating for someone else? Are you advocating for yourself? Are you teaching about advocacy? Like there's like what we do. There is so much that goes into it, and I think it's something we could have like a 10-part series on easily.
Next season, all about advocacy. Yeah, and I think it's so interesting because we all three of us sit at the fun intersections of advocacy is something that we do for work, but then at the same time, it's also something that, kind of like you said earlier, we do in our personal lives. Like we're constantly advocating for ourselves or our children or our friends or just our community members and things like that. And then there's also volunteering to advocate for other people. So like I said, the world is very wide. But I guess if we wanted to kind of center in on maybe some ways that advocacy can look in like the work sphere, I guess.
Okay.
Like maybe like job opportunities in advocacy, and also we have to advocate for ourselves in the workspace sometimes.
Definitely.
What are some of the ways that I guess that maybe has looked for y'all in the past? Big wide question. Yeah.
Now, sometimes I'll talk to people who are volunteering with me in my normal job, or I'm like meeting them in the community out tabling or something. And I'm like, oh, that's so exciting that you get to do this. And it is exciting to get to do advocacy as a full-time job. But usually when I'm working with college students, it's like, it's fun and it has so many unique challenges that I think are somewhat specific to like nonprofit spheres, but also like advocating for yourself is hard. Advocating 40 hours a week is also hard. Like I think it's a challenging field in a really unique way. The longer I spend in it, the more I'm like, oh, I love this. And also you have to learn how, like you're saying, to advocate for yourself in your workplace, even like no matter how much you care about the topic that you work on, you have to like draw some separation and learn how to take care of yourself even when you have fun advocacy-based jobs.
Boundaries are so important, and learning to advocate for your personal time when you need personal time, because you've gone nonstop.
That's being very pointedly directed at me, and for all of our listeners and viewers back at home. I just recently used some of my time, and I took a couple of days off, and it was very good.
We are so happy for her.
You're learning.
She ignored my texts for the most part, and I thought that was absolutely, I've never had so much joy being ignored in my life. But yeah, I think boundaries, like what are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? Like if there's a situation in your workspace that happens and you like, it does not sit right with you, like how do you stand up for yourself and have that open communication with other people? It's super important because there are jobs and there are unhealthy and toxic work environments where you can't do that. And so how do you build a culture where you can have the space and flexibility to just stand up for yourself and be like, hey, you know what? Like, no.
I like the use of like the word like culture,
Mhm.
and because I think that's something that as time moves on, I feel like a lot of like workspaces and workplaces, and I'm thinking mostly of like corporations that have begun doing this, where it's like, we're a family, and it's like, you have 50,000 employees, and it is absolutely more than possible for like folks to be very intentional in cultivating healthy workspaces in corporation settings. But that does require very intentionality to do that for sure, and to create spaces that that do encourage like healthy work boundaries and healthy everything, healthy lifestyles. But yeah, I think it's interesting and difficult, and something that we have to continuously wrestle with, of the whenever your life's work is advocacy, but you're also just very involved like in community spaces as well, also in advocacy. It's like, oh, it feels like I'm doing things that I love all the time, things that I care about with people that I care about all the time, but it feels like my entire life is work sometimes, you know. We've all visited about this a few times, of where it's like, I love what I do, but it's like, oh, all of my free time activities are also
advocacy.
Yeah.
are also advocacy, are also
Yeah.
kind of extensions of my job. So, which is, it's that tension of like, I continuously wrestling with, how do I like advocate for myself, whereas advocacy for myself and like those like boundaries needed, or where is this just kind of my passions and what I'm interested in. So that's an interesting like tension that I'm constantly exploring, I think, in my own life with it.
Something I'm finding the longer I'm in, actually, like you were saying, like a big collection of different spaces, is how much overlap I find in what are kind of at their core really basic self-advocacy skills. So for instance, I do hotline advocacy work for the Advocacy Center. And I was at a doctor's appointment of my own a couple weeks ago. And I have a great PCP, but I was like, I'm using the exact same skills for myself that I use for someone else. I also use those skills for tough conversations with my boss or public officials. Like, it's really, when you get a really good grip on what you need to feel prepared to advocate for yourself or someone else in a moment, it's the same process with like different details every time. And so it's one of those really useful skills to build, because you'll use it in more ways than you can imagine. And sometimes it's telling someone, I can't do that right now, or I will text you back when I get back from vacation, even though I really want to answer the question now, because I always want to fix the problem now. But it's the same kind of set of skills. And the more you use them, the easier it is to set them. Like you were saying about boundaries, like when you always hold your boundaries in place, it gets easier, because the first couple times it's so hard, but it always gets easier the more you do them.
I guess I'm very interested and would love to just kind of tease out a little bit more, if you would like, of like what particular like advocacy skills like you're thinking of, or like you've been developing, and we'll chime in as we think of additional ones. Additional skills.
I know personally, I'm a big list person in general. I live and die by a to-do list. And so when I am having a hard meeting, a doctor's appointment, which is something I don't enjoy doing, or I'm doing those things for someone else, I make a list. Sometimes it's written, sometimes it's in my head. But for me, that's like a very like essential and basic advocacy skill, is having a reference point to come back to, is I need these things, and I've thought about these things before. When we're doing big event planning and work or something, we're always like, something's going to go wrong, because something always goes wrong. But if you plan everything else really well, and you've got backup plans in place for a lot of things, when one part falls apart, you're not immediately drowning, because it's not all falling apart at once. Like, the more prepared you are, the more equipped you are for something to go wrong. And I feel that way about an advocacy space, or my own kind of self-advocacy, is if I'm ready for everything I can plan for, and so I'm not worried about it, I can handle the stuff that pops up in the last minute that is really hard. So yeah, that's kind of like the really big one that applies to just about everything.
I think one that pops into my mind is, somebody said, I don't even remember exactly when, it was sometime in this last year at something that I was at, was that not every conversation is a confrontation either, which is huge and very transformative to an anxious person like myself, as I've talked about a bit before, is I am really bad at just like in like my headspace and then also in like my body space. If my body registers most things as confrontation, I don't know why, it just does. So that's been like adopting that kind of like mantra playing in my head over and over, especially before like bigger conversations or things like that, is just like, hey, it's just a conversation. It's not necessarily a confrontation, but at the same time, a big part of advocacy is being ready and being prepared for confrontation and being ready. And I think a part of that ties into like having lists prepared is like being educated yourself. Of like, what do I need to know? Like, do I have all of my information? Am I prepared to make asks? Or am I still needing to do a little bit of research? Because I'm definitely a lot less ready to have those big conversations whenever I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yes, being ready for,
Ugh.
because confrontation always sounds bad. Like it
Mhm.
sounds like it's going to be a negative thing. But you're completely right. Advocating is, you are always running into tension. You are asking for something that you don't have or someone needs and doesn't have. And sometimes the answer is yes. And it's like you walk in and you ask and like ready for the fight. And they're like, no, here you go. And it's the most beautiful moment to ever exist. It feels so good.
Yeah.
But so often it's not always a mean no, but it's a, we can't do that.
Mhm.
I'm not sure we can. Is it worth the resources? Like you're having to make a case and an argument for something. And so knowing why it's important, like doing all that background work, I think is, like you're saying, so essential to feeling comfortable and prepared to make that ask.
I like both of what you said gave me like a this has been applied so recently, you know, more of the specifics about it, but I've had to advocate for my kiddo, and without going into too many specifics, there were some issues somewhere, just keep it very vague. There was issues somewhere and I had to go and talk to somebody in a position of leadership and be like, these are things that are happening, why is nothing being done? And so like going in, I like was going in like rearing for like a little like boxing match, like I was Kangaroo Jack, you know what I mean? And it was very much like, oh no, like here are the answers to your questions. Like here I can show you this, like this is what we have on file. And I was like, okay, no, cool. And I asked the questions I needed to ask and, you know, talked with my kiddo at some point, you know, between then, and was like it's always okay to like say no and like things like that, and like know your own boundaries. Like if this doesn't make you like, if it doesn't make you feel right in your body, no matter in which way, shape, or form, like you always have the power to stand up for yourself and for others if you see something like that happening to other people as well.
Somebody might have answers to your questions. It doesn't mean that they are acceptable. Like you
Yeah.
can still need or want more. Like
Mhm.
just because they have an answer doesn't mean it's always the right answer.
That's for sure. And that also made me think as well, just absolutely always and forever love the conversations of like, especially with our youth and with our students, of your body, like it is your body, it is your like life. You are entitled to make decisions. You're allowed to say no. And you're allowed to have autonomy. Always love that, which also just makes me like think about like we do a lot of work with a lot of different communities that all have a lot of very different and unique perspectives and experiences and cultures and religions and all kinds of stuff. And just advocacy looks so different in all of those spaces. I don't really have any deeper thoughts on that in the exact moment, but it just made me think about that and how important it is to, in all things and in all advocacy work, here's the deeper thought, is to stay in such constant conversation, and a lot of times working with especially like populations and cultures and experiences that are very different, like from my own. Like it's not me, like it is not my job to come in and say what I think needs to happen. It's my job to kind of step in as like more of like a supporter or like an amplifier, I guess. If it's like, I'm not saying, like, I'm not going to come in and be like, this is what needs to be done on behalf of the Hispanic community in Waco. I am not an authority on that. I can just share like things that other people have said with me, or work on like connecting other folks and educating myself so that I can be a better supporter and a better partner. But it's not my job to say, here's what I think needs to happen. It's here's what other people have told me.
Absolutely. I work for a healthcare organization, and we're incredibly passionate about trauma-informed care and culturally competent care. And there's so many brilliant and difficult, because most things with nuance are difficult, conversations around on paper when you ask someone in healthcare, or especially in this space is like sexual assault based healthcare, is like, what does trauma-informed care look like? We have this checklist of like what it means, but if we are not accounting for like the cultural nuances of how someone understands their body, how they understand who has access to their body, just the way that they view the relationship between like their body and sex, we can't give them the right kind of trauma-informed care. Like, we have to have a deeper understanding of how someone lives and experiences the world in order to provide them the resources they need to advocate for themselves and then support that advocacy. Sometimes I think the best part of being an advocate is someone tells you what they need and you go, cool, I can fix that. I can go get you a blanket. I can find you a snack. I can tell someone to leave the room when you don't want to, or I can stand there as menacingly as I can possibly get behind you. Like, yeah, you're going to listen to this person in this moment. And I get to do both sides. But figuring out, like, what are the details of what this person needs, because it's different person to person and culture to culture about what empowers them to advocate for themselves.
I do have a question for you. You do have like a lot of background, experience, and knowledge on advocacy. What are some hurdles that are faced often when advocating, either for yourself or for others?
Okay. In like a immediate micro sense, or like
however you want to interpret the question.
All of the above. We love big questions.
Cool. I love a big question too. I'm gonna start big, start small and go big, because I think they get difficult in different ways that way. In an immediate sense, so you're at the doctor's office, you're with someone in a difficult situation. I think the hardest part is the like emotional turmoil of it. Is I mentioned I don't like going to the doctor's office, so like I have a lot of big stressful feelings in that moment, which make everything else harder. So I have to be prepared for the fact that I know it's hard. When you love and care about someone, their feelings are really hard. I don't have kiddos, but you do. When your kiddo's upset, it's hard to advocate for them because there's so many feelings that you're all having. I think that's actually one of the big hurdles, is we psych ourselves out of what we know we can do. We get lost in this idea of conflict. We're like so emotionally wrapped up in something that's very immediate and personal. It's not that hurdle, but it is one that I think you kind of like have to learn how to address. I think the other big hurdle, and one that kind of I think goes across everything, is that knowing that you can ask and how to ask, because there's a power dynamic in essentially all forms of advocacy. If we are advocating for something, someone has power in a thing that we want that we don't. Something I tell all the students I ever work with is like, no matter, it doesn't matter if they are the president of the United States or your university chancellor, they're just a person. Like, they are truly, at the end of the day, just another person. And when you think about them that way, they get at least a little bit less scary. Because I think a lot of like the hurdle that I see people run into most is they don't realize they can actually ask, or they are so scared of the no that they're going to get, they don't actually effectively ask. Not easy to get past. I'm saying like, well, just change your mind, where they have to put their socks on the same way. Those won't get you there. But I think that is one of the really big hurdles, is just knowing that you have to take the big like jump and ask anyway.
I guess specifically thinking of like advocacy on a larger scale, so more like social issues, because like we're obviously advocating for folks like on a day-to-day basis as much as we can, but also like a large part of our job is advocating around sexual violence prevention, which is really interesting. So it's whenever you're advocating for a shift in beliefs and behaviors and attitudes around like sexual violence, it's interesting. So I guess what are some, like, are there any, hurdles, I guess, that are unique to big idea advocacy?
To like cultural change?
Like, do you think it's hard to change the way that the world thinks?
A little bit.
Easy.
Done.
That is so specific, because so often when we think about advocacy, we're like, call your senator, and you should. We should always be calling our senators and telling them our thoughts, because they only listen to people who call them, so call them all the time.
Have them on speed.
That's saved in my phone, always ready. But
I'm gonna get
that
blocked so quick.
But that is it's like, it doesn't always mean you'll get the option, like the response that you want, but there's a very concrete path to changing policies. We can get a city council, counties,
Mhm.
states, federal government, like there are rules on paper that can be changed to better a situation. But when we're talking about things like sexual assault prevention or sexual violence prevention, we can make the on paper process as good as possible, but we don't ever want to have to get to the on paper process. And that's so much harder. How you mentioned like everything's different by culture and faith and religion and experience. We're not changing one culture, we're changing thousands and thousands of cultures. And they're all starting out in different places. Like we're not all sitting nicely in a line, taking steps forward together. Everything is scattered across the floor. And you'll have a culture or like a family that holds two values that you think are in conflict. Like one might be something that we find really good and useful for sexual violence prevention. And then also maybe something that we find a big hindrance for healthy relationships in the same space. So there's like universal language and universal education don't get us there. So yeah, I agree, it's hard. I don't know if I have any answers, but like it's real hard.
Yeah.
I think like
Uh-huh.
y'all are having like a really good point of like meeting people where they're at is always huge in like what we do in our work. And it's like you were saying, like you don't come in saying like this is wrong and you need to do this.
Never get far that way.
Because honestly, I would tune you out so quickly, no matter who it is. Because you know, how dare you?
Absolutely.
And so like for example, there are, speaking from my of course personal experiences, there are certain cultures that don't view a shift in cultural norms or societal norms as a huge like make it or break it in the work that we do for sexual violence. And so it's a unique situation, and how we approach things is so important. Like of course like meeting them where they're at, but also using the right terminology that they use within their own communities. Like for example, being informed as well. So like if we go to, you know, like with the Waco Pride Network, if we go to one of their meetings, like how do we make sure that the language we're using is inclusive to everyone that's, you know, in that space? Because we were like kind of joking around earlier, but not all relationships are made equal. Like monogamy, polygamy, there's all the different orientations and genders and identities that somebody has and holds true to their heart. So like when we're doing our work, meeting them where they're at and being as informed as possible, like y'all have said, is crucial.
Absolutely. I also think something that came to mind with like how do we make cultural change? I think I was reading the data on it today, but in 2015, do y'all remember when the Supreme Court case that legalized gay marriage in America? So we live in a
66.
state, we live in a state that was the decision that changed the laws in our state. Some states had already passed marriage equality laws. And if you track like the public acceptance and popularity of marriage equality from 2015 to now, it's so much more popular than any of us ever thought it would be then, which is exciting for so many of us. But it did take a really big like structural decision, and then culture shifted to follow it. And there's lots of other reasons that culture has changed and that LGBTQ identities are more accepted and included in society. But in just the almost 10 years, which feels like a very long time since that decision, we've seen culture change very much that like can be tracked back to a Supreme Court decision. Sometimes we need the really big wins as well, as a direction like guide us all and point us all towards.
That's interesting.
I think something we've seen in meetings, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Something we've seen expressed in the spaces that we occupy within our work. Kyla and I, for those who can't see, I'm gesturing towards her, is that a lot of people who are doing this work and are new or have been doing it some time, and the focus is having the shift for XYZ is like the results. Like, when do we see the results? And in doing this advocacy work that we do, whether it's our space or your spaces that you occupy as well, it's important to remember that like you will not get instant gratification from it. This is something that will take, you know, maybe a few years, but it will probably take generations to just,
See real change.
yeah, for sure.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
Yes. A couple of years ago, after a really big and devastating change at work, the whole summer, I think the phrase that we all said constantly was like the arc of history bends towards justice, because it was like there was no way to get through the kind of loss that we were experiencing without believing that it will get better and it will just take time. And knowing that you won't get to see the results of your work is hard. Like, I think it's a very exhausting thing to look at a problem the size of the problems that we all grapple with on a daily basis and go, this will change a life, it will change many lives, and I might never know about them. Like, the class that you teach tomorrow might change that person's life. It might change their kid's life or a friend's life, a neighbor. Like, the ripple effect of community-based work is incredible, but so rarely do we get to see the results. And that's hard as the people doing it 40 something hours a week.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I guess just kind of as we're looking forward and kind of starting to wrap up a little bit more, I would love to take some time to maybe talk about like self-care and advocacy work. Like, what are some good ways to engage in like self-care spaces, I guess? And I would say, and we've definitely hit, I think always my biggest one is like healthy boundaries and creating and learning how to create those healthy boundaries of making space, continuing to make space for yourself in advocate work.
Yeah, I have all of like the big thoughts, opinions, and feelings about self-care, as I think anyone does after around this work. The biggest thing that I believe and like I've learned over time is a really big difference between like resting and recharging. And that took me a solid like 5 years of really consistent community work to understand, is that there are days like yesterday, I went home, I went to the grocery store on my way home, I got home and I did nothing with my groceries away because I didn't have the energy. And that is restful, but it does not recharge me. And so sometimes the things that are recharging are not restful. Sometimes it's cleaning your house. It's a project. It's something that you find like true fulfillment in. And as much as there's nothing wrong with watching reality TV on the couch or yoga is lovely, those things don't meaningfully recharge you. They don't refill your bucket. And sometimes things that seem like they shouldn't do. I find a lot of volunteer work is a big part of how I recharge, because sometimes I need something where I get the actual win in front of me. That is recharging, even though it takes physical time and energy and is tiring in its own way. If I'm fighting a massive fight over here where I don't get to see any wins for the next 10 plus years, I need something where in my hands I have the tiny victory that I need as the balance out to that kind of like bigger picture work. So it seems like a strange thing to say that for self-care. I'm like, do more volunteering, but it's one of the most useful things I've learned.
And I think it makes sense, especially like in this space where we've just talked about like a lot of this work and a lot of the big picture advocacy work is something that you don't see the results of, which can be hard. It can be so hard mentally. So I think it makes sense. Maybe it makes sense to folks outside of those spaces where it's like you're gonna recover from work by doing more work. Sometimes, sometimes because it is just, and it's nice because like there are some community events where it's like, oh, I've done work and work and work, and now after hours there's a community event that I'm going to go to that's technically work, but I'm going to get to be surrounded by all of these incredible people that are a part of our community that are all working towards the same thing, and that can be like recharge. So just also being surrounded by folks that are like engaging in similar spaces and similar work is. We need community.
Absolutely.
We need community.
Yeah. And I think it's hard because we all work in advocacy full time, but talking to friends and community members who are looking at, if it's global conflict or laws passing or just like immediate problems, like there's nothing I can do. I feel so overwhelmed. It's really easy to start shutting down and going, I'm busy. Like I have a full-time job. I have to cook dinner. Like I have to do these things. But I really believe that the less you engage, the less hopeful the world feels. That if you do not show up to the community event in the evening, even though it means your week is longer than it was, the world will feel hopeless because you never got to be in that room surrounded by people who care about the same things. Like, of course it feels hopeless when you're alone in your house scrolling through the internet. It's not an encouraging spot to be. So yeah, I feel like I'm always nagging him like, well, how do you volunteer? Like, what do you do to make the world feel better? Like, be better and feel better. And if your answer is like, even like, yes, put things online, there's all sorts of brilliant digital activism. But if you are not physically in your community at some point, it's gonna feel pretty hopeless. Mhm.
I concur.
We said a lot of words.
This is me just like, I'm just feeling everything y'all are saying. I struggle with self-care sometimes because like I feel so like sometimes I'm in the community and I feel guilt over like, there's so much to be done, and yet here I'm not doing any of it. So I have learned personally, for me, what helps is going home and cleaning. I don't take my shoes off. I struggle with focusing a lot. So I leave my shoes on and I just put headphones in and kindly ignore the people in my house. And we'll just clean until my body's like, you are ready. Or I'll spend time with like family, or I'll do, other like hobbies and stuff that give me instant gratification. Because I need that for my mental health. But I think self-care is something that looks differently for every person, because like whether it's like doing stuff with my kiddo at Girl Scouts, or exercising, which I need to is on the list of things to do. Like it's definitely different for everyone, and especially in this line of work, like burnout is so easy to come across, and knowing what, like you said, recharges you is always vital.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, any kind of final thoughts on advocacy before we scoot our way through?
We heart advocacy.
Yeah, I think advocacy and boundaries are like, they fit so deeply together. I think that like the best piece of advice I've ever gotten is leave a situation if it's not the right one, and that can be a relationship, that can be a workplace. I quit a job once, that a backup plan, and I've never regretted it. It's like the best thing I ever got to do. You can walk out of a doctor's office, which I think is something that I wish I could tell every person every day and it's not easy. It is, healthcare is expensive in this country. Getting appointments is hard. There's so many factors that make it difficult, but you do not have to sit in that room if you are not being listened to, if you are not being cared for, if you are being treated badly. Put your clothes back on if you had to take them off and walk out the door. Like,
Yes.
Just grab your clothes and whatever you're in already.
Look out, it's yours now.
Fill it.
Just leave. And
Yeah.
whether, or it's a social event, like it can be anything, but remind yourself that you are not required to stay in that room if it is not the right room to be in. And finding the like, sometimes that like gut instinct of courage, like that gets you out the door. Once you do it once, it gets easier to do again. And I think it really does change your life. But you don't, if you don't want to be at dinner, if you don't want to be a doctor, if you don't want to be on that date, just leave. Consequences are not.
If you don't want to be in this
I don't want to be
podcast,
here
yeah.
anymore. Alex, please stop.
No.
Yeah. That's, and it seems like one line on paper, but I think it's one of the most powerful forms of advocacy for ourselves and others that we often have. There's a lot of talk about being at the table. Sometimes the table is not worth being at. Like sometimes the offer to be at the table is not a good enough offer for your time and energy and resources. And you can say no, and you can walk away from an offer.
I've walked out of a dinner before.
Exactly. Sometimes you should. Yeah.
Hard. I just have to, like, I personally have to also sit with that because it's hard, and like for a lot of folks, especially, I think there's just this perception, especially like in like with people of authority, of where it's like, is a doctor a figure of authority? It feels like, yeah, it feels like, but I mean, like, it's so hard to like have that autonomy, and like in just hearing somebody say like, no, you are allowed to leave. Like there is no reason for you to stay if it is not good, healthy, or safe for you to be here. So I think that that's a really, really huge, and like you said, it may seem like just a line on paper, but I think that that's a very transformative idea for a lot of folks. So I just personally had to like let my heart sit with that for a second because it was very good. But just kind of as we're transitioning, I would love to just open up some space just for you to share a little bit about the work that you do, Alex, and just all of the hats that you wear. I always tell folks in meetings, anytime I have the opportunity to visit with folks in our community that also know you, I always say, oh, I love her so much. I want to be her when I grow up. I'm like, only a couple years older than me, but it doesn't matter.
It's making me feel old.
No.
Yeah, I used to joke that I was actually gonna get different hats, so I could like physically
Yes.
change what hat I'm wearing. I think it'd be a really fun little party trick. Yeah.
Just little tiny hats.
Yes, there we go.
Oh,
Pixel
bucket hat.
impersonator.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yes. Oh goodness. I'm really lucky, and a lot of the hats I wear overlap because when you're passionate about one thing, there are huge connections between them. I mentioned I get to work with you guys and a lot of the rest of the Advocacy Center staff in Hotline work, which is one of those like really special, fulfilling things. Is I'm like, I got 3 hours of sleep last night, but I feel really good the next
Yeah.
day. I am on the board and really involved in community outreach for Waco Pride Network, which is a local LGBTQ plus advocacy and community-based organization, mostly known for Out of the Brazos, which is the big community pride festival every year in October. And all of that kind of info is coming out soon. But our next big event that's very exciting is we are partnering with the Cameron Park Zoo for a community zoo day on June 7th.
Whoa.
It's called Rainbow Roar.
Oh, yes.
We are
Oh.
so excited. There will be nonprofits. Y'all are invited. The email went out today.
Come see us there.
Nonprofits with resources and information. I mean, the animals will be there. We're not going to talk about that it's a zoo.
Yeah.
But that is so fun. It's also one of those moments where we were talking about like culture changes. People always assume like, well, Waco must be so difficult to live in as an LGBTQ plus person. And sometimes it may be, but also the zoo reached out to us. We didn't reach out to them. Like we live in a culture that is shifting and supportive and wonderful. So that's coming up. There'll be
So cool.
prom. We do a prom every year for
Yeah.
young people. And then we also do an adult one, and then obviously out. And then my normal work, I work with Planned Parenthood. We do the same kind of advocacy kind of year round. We do volunteer work. One of the really big special projects that we're working on that makes me think of young people a lot is around period poverty. So we know that so many young people who get their period, and young people all the way through adulthood struggle to afford the period products they need. And it means that children miss school or people miss work because of it. So we've been working with community partners and volunteers to collect those donations and build period kits that kind of cover someone for their whole cycle that month. So you're not having to piece things together. That's one of my favorite projects that we're working on that I think is like something that means a lot in the little bits of everyday lives. Also, I and some friends, we're coming up the 1-year anniversary of the McLennan County Diaper Collective, which was I call it like that's my child or my really weird hobby. It is about like last December, January, I realized I had so many conversations, and I'm sure you guys have had them, of people going, I need diapers. Like the thing that's difficult in childcare, in healthcare, in getting to work the next day is my kid doesn't have the diapers that they need. And so I was like, somebody in the city must have diapers. And so I was like Googling away, and I was like, oh, the only diaper options have a lot of requirements. That is that nonprofit's business. They can do what they want, but there was nowhere you could go on a reliable basis and get diapers in the size you need for kids. And parents are telling me that they've taped diapers that are too small together for their kids. And so there's got to be a better solution. And then I asked everyone else who would start a diaper bank, and they all told me no. So we gave in and we started a diaper bank. And yeah, we're at the McLennan County Diaper Collective. We give out a ton of diapers every month, the third Sunday. And it's been the most like rewarding and happy thing to meet all the little babies that show up with their parents. And when they change sizes month to month, it makes me really emotional because like they're getting bigger, they're growing up. Or like we have a family who came to our very first diaper distribution last July, whose kiddo is, we probably won't see him again. They're done. And that's actually great. It's so wonderful that they don't need us anymore. Or when parents tell me they've gotten new jobs, like that's, their lives are changing, but it changes mine all the time as well.
I'm so emotional just thinking. It's so
good all the time in the best way.
The tissue box is over there. You can use my sleeve.
Yeah, it was a form of advocacy I never planned to get involved in. We joke a lot. Our diaper bank was founded by a bunch of people who don't have kids, which seems, I did not know how diaper sizes worked until I started a diaper bank. But it was an issue that someone just needed to make some noise about. And we're really good at making noise. And so they don't need us to speak for them. Like my clients don't need me to say to say, well, these people over here need this thing. They need me to show up and give them something that allows them to advocate for themselves more, to ask for a raise at work, to get a job again, because it's hard to stay employed when you are struggling to afford basic needs. Like if I can cover one piece of it, that is me advocating for a tiny thing that allows them to advocate for themselves and their families and to thrive in what that looks like best for them. And I don't have to do that part. They can do it themselves.
Oh, so good. I guess what are some ways that maybe folks can get involved or learn more about some of the things that you're involved? I mean, I can. I was like, I can handle the hotline advocate part because that is part of what we do.
That's what you do.
Yes.
Everything's online these days, which is great. I'm sure you'll put links in the description. So for Waco Pride Network and the Diaper Bank, online is the best way to find us. Both have websites, both have social media profiles that are really easy to see and follow and hear about what's coming up and what's going on and get involved. If that's donating things, if that's volunteering with either, we'd always love to have you.
I love it. Makes my heart so excited. But yes, so we're gonna go ahead and transition now. Maria's got our relationship goal for us today. So take it away, my friend.
Perfect. So my relationship goal is to empower the students in your lives to stand up for themselves on a day-to-day basis, no matter where they're at, or even to help advocate for other people that are in their lives. You know, we see it especially in schools, like bullying, like you can advocate, stand up for someone else, for yourself. And if you're a peer, like, you know, maybe you're passionate about something, you know, like us, and maybe that could be starting a club, even, but it's never too early to get into advocacy. So definitely want to encourage everyone listening to empower yourselves or anyone else in that way.
Find what makes you tick. Go for it. Get involved.
Captain Hook.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then I have our recommendation for today, which my recommendation is short. It's sweet. We have got a lot of events going on in April because April is the best month of the year. Because it is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So we would absolutely love to, for all of our Waco, we're close to Waco friends, we would absolutely love to have you at our events. Our first one that's coming up, it's our art gallery on April 5th from 6 to 9 at Cultivate 712 in downtown Waco. There's going to be a ton of absolutely incredible art from folks of all ages and stages and places in life. All about healthy relationships. So we would just love to celebrate those with y'all, hang out with you for a little bit, talk about art, talk about life, talk about whatever
Advocacy.
else. Advocacy if you're interested, opportunities, ways to get involved. So that is absolutely my recommendation for today is to stick around in April, see what's up, show up to some of our events. We would love to meet you. So that's all from us today. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Alex, for being here. We love hanging out with you.
Thanks for having me.
We love learning from you. But in the meantime, if you are just really wanting some more Advocacy Center content, you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Advocacy Waco. Or if you're particularly interested in the prevention department and want to hang out a little bit more with us, you can follow us on Instagram at ACCVC_prevention. But in the meantime, we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Real-ationship Goals. This episode was produced by the Prevention and Education Department of the Advocacy Center for Crime Victims and Children in Waco, Texas. Interested in more content from P&E or the Advocacy Center? You can follow us on Instagram at ACCVC_prevention or on Instagram and Facebook at Advocacy Waco. Be sure to like this episode and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. Bye.